Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview review, I'm taking a look at Boots on the Ground Deluxe Edition, designed by Sean Cooke and published by Worthington Publishing. This review copy was provided by Worthington. Boots on the Ground is a tactical scale, 1 to 3 player, modern era wargame that is played on the map of an urban setting covered by a square grid. Each soldier in your squad or squads, and each enemy insurgent is represented by their own counter. This review will be focusing on the Solitaire gameplay. When playing Solitaire, you choose one of the missions that comes with the game, you place your squad of soldiers on the map, and you attempt to complete your missions while a deck of cards controls and manages the insurgents and the random events. Let's do a quick overview. I have a playthrough video of an entire mission for an in-depth look at the game. I'll cover my pros and cons, and I'll end with my final thoughts. All right, let's get on the table. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the map, the actual playing area, right? The cards involved in the game, the units themselves, a quick example of combat, and then kind of cover some missions and victory conditions. So you can see the map here. It is a mounted, hard-mounted map. You can see the entire thing out here. I do have it set up, sort of the generic setup of different forms of unknown cover placed on these red locations, unknown or possible civilians placed on the white locations, and then also these unknown sort of kits or boxes to find in the green locations here. Each mission you're going to set up, you're going to put your squad of soldiers in a certain place, and you're going to have to complete whatever the mission is. You know, it could be making it from one of the green zones to another green zone. It could be going and rescuing a hostage. It could be eliminating all the insurgents in a building, which was what my playthrough video did. It could be trying to think of other things. Maybe hold out in a building where the insurgents are attacking you while you're trying to hold out until you get extracted. So, variety of mission types. The game comes with 12 missions in the rulebook. As I mentioned kind of at the beginning, it is it's not a hex encounter, it's a square encounter game. So movement and combat, everything is going to be covered from square to square. You are going to be controlling a squad or squads. Again, it kind of depends on what you choose / what the mission is. So right now I have a squad, the red squad, alpha squad out here on the board. I'll go ahead and zoom in so you guys can kind of see. Most squads are going to be made up of a leader, medic, sniper, scout, heavy weapon expert, and demolition. Each of those units are going to have different abilities. Now, when you do your activation, each turn, you're going to choose to activate either a group of your soldiers that are adjacent to each other. They're going to be called a team. So it could be, depending on how you have them all set up, it could be all 6. It could be fewer than that. They're going to have more limited with their firing. They're not going to have necessarily the same special abilities, but they're all going to be able to do move, fire, move. Pretty interchangeable with those actions. Or you can activate an individual, and then that individual is going to have special abilities, such as a medic, say removing a hit from an adjacent allied unit or hostage. Demolition expert can create a door with their explosives, throw a grenade, fire an RPG. The heavy weapon expert can maybe attack multiple insurgents in the same turn as opposed to only shooting at one. You get the idea, right? Each of the units has a special ability. Now, there's optional rules to make up your squad as you want, adding in units from Bravo squad, but just for the base game, you pick a squad. It's going to have those 6 members, and you go from there. So that's your activation. And again, you're completing a mission, you're moving around, conducting movement, combat, special activations for you, individual or team. The AI is going to be controlled by the cards. Now, the AI in this game, the cards are a guide. You're going to have to do kind of the place-to-place little movements, but the cards are going to do a good job of telling you kind of what's going on. And based on the mission parameters and then what the cards tell you, you're going to have a good idea of what to do. Here's a stack of cards, and depending on the mission, you're going to use a certain number of them. So there's high 50s, maybe 60 cards. I haven't counted them. The mission may be something like, say, only use 30 cards, and you have to get through your mission within those 30 cards. Here's an example of cards. So here's one. Place one new insurgent. Place in the closest unoccupied window or door, and fire. So 2 things on that. 1, you're placing 1 insurgent, pretty clear. in the closest unoccupied window or door, pretty clear, and then the fire. Now the fire though is going to be all insurgents that have line of sight and range to fire on your soldiers. So just keep that in mind when you're playing. It sometimes can be harder because it's not just one guy firing, it may be whoever's in range and whoever can see you. Now I kind of have my units just set out here, but say you actually had them, on the squares right here, right? And you had them oriented properly and you had it all ready to go, and the arrows on them, and I'll cover that in a second here, are going to indicate their firing arc. But say you had your squad like this. Well, if I drew this and it said place one insurgent in the closest unoccupied window or door, now, and this is what the insurgents look like, I would maybe, get to choose, but the reality is place in the closest window or door. Windows are blue, doors are brown. He's going to go right here. He's going to be facing, and he's going to fire, and he's going to fire into the side of my demo unit here. Now I mentioned and then the cards, there's other cards, move insurgents, say move 2 of them, so they're going to come towards you and then fire. Special sort of things that happen, special events. A closest insurgent becomes a heavy weapons expert. Not good for you, trust me, for the turn and fires. And there are some ones that can be helpful. Place up to 2 GIs if available, adjacent to team leader as reinforcements. So 2 GIs drop off, so different, sort of more generic type of unit. Units themselves, and we'll just go ahead and look at the leader. Very, very simple. Have the arrow, which is their firing arc. It has nothing to do with movement. And then the number on the left is a firing modifier. The number on the right is their movement. When they activate as a team, they have the same movement of 3 and a fire modifier of 0. However, you do individual activation, that's when those numbers come to effect. So potentially, improved numbers, faster, makes sense, right? You can move a little faster on your own versus working together with your squad, having to cover each other, just be a little more safe. Missions will have a victory condition. When I had the eliminate the insurgents in the building mission that my playthrough, simple as that. I started over in Green Zone Whiskey. I had to make my way over to this building here. I had to eliminate all the insurgents inside, and that's how I won. Again, it could be something like escorting hostages to a green zone. Maybe you have to go into a building, grab them, take them to a green zone. You have to hold out in a building until the cards run out, or whatever the case is. Again, every mission is going to have a different victory condition, and what you can do if you want to compare game to game, say you're playing the same mission, they recommend that you just compare how many cards. So a mission that say starts with 30 cards, you compare and say, hey, I won it with 10 cards left. Try again, see if you can get to have more cards left to show that you completed the mission faster. The only last thing I guess I do want to mention is the combat. Just so you guys who are not aware, combat is very simple. It is a differential D6 die roll. So for example, you have demo and insurgent, say they're firing at each other, or one of them is firing. One of them is going to have defensive fire if their firing arc allows it. If they were, say, that insurgent was firing at the demo in the rear, he would not be able to return fire. He would still roll for the defensive modifier, but it wouldn't obviously be able to return fire. Regardless, you're going to go ahead and roll. Say the red is for us, black is for the insurgents. The insurgent is firing on our demo. You roll a 6 as the attacker, that's the first number, and then the defensive fire is the minus on that. So 6 minus 2, say there's no modifiers. You have a 4, so a positive 4. You would check the chart for an insurgent. Insurgent, a +4 or more kills the target. So bad news for us, our demo unit was just eliminated. Say it was 3. 3 minus 2 is only a +1. That wounds the target. So you would go ahead and flip the demo unit over to his back wounded side. If he was already there, you'd add a critical wound. If he had that and he got hit again, he's KIA. Now, it could be as bad as, say, the insurgent fires, and he gets a 1, and we roll a 6. Well, 1 minus 6 is -5. On a -3 or more for the insurgent, the firing unit actually becomes wounded, in which case, when insurgents are wounded, they're removed from the map, placed back in the cup. If they are killed, they're removed from the map and then put away permanently for the rest of the mission. Although there's a ton of insurgents like counters, so I don't think it's possible to run out, but I guess it could happen if you had a long enough game, right? So, all right, again, watch my playthrough video for an in-depth look at the game. That's enough for the overview. You guys get an idea, the map, the cards, units, combat, missions, victory conditions, how the game works in general. let's go ahead and go into my pros and cons. As always, cons first. Okay, so my first issue with the game is this sometimes has a generic feeling. Your soldiers, they aren't named. Locations aren't named. Buildings are simply numbers on the board. The insurgents, their cards, the events, they're all kind of unremarkable as well. I understand this does theoretically allow the game flexibility with the setting, but the reality is when you look at an urban map, right, set in a desert city, and you see civilians and insurgents, dressed in Middle Eastern clothes, including the common Iraqi headdress, the kafia, that tells you this game is attempting to simulate combat in the Middle East during the War on Terror. So having something to maybe make it a little bit more on the point would be nice. All right, my second con is the simplicity and randomness of the combat can sometimes work against it. I love rolling dice, and I'm a firm believer in the chaos of combat. Yet in Boots on the Ground, combat can sometimes come down to moving out of cover, taking a shot at the enemy, hoping they don't roll better than you, causing you a wound, and then you're ducking back into cover. Or even worse, activating an entire team, kind of moving into the open and just taking pot shots at the insurgents, knowing they're probably going to be shooting right back at you while you're standing in the open during their activation. There aren't really ways to stack modifiers in your favor. So yes, the combat is simple, which can be really nice, but also, you can't duck around a corner and shoot. You don't get opportunity fire. Those just aren't part of the game. In addition, because combat results allow for the attacker or shooter to suffer a wound if they roll poorly enough, you're just taking huge risk every time your squad leader or your heavy weapons expert simply takes a shot. Most of the time, the best modifier you can hope for is along the lines of a +2. When you're comparing D6s, a +2 is good, but it's definitely no guarantee of success. And very few attacks have such a modifier. Many more simply don't have one. Everyone firing as a team activation is a +0, in fact, right? So no modifiers. If you roll a 2 as an attacker and the insurgents roll a 6 without any modifiers supporting you, that soldier is now going to suffer a wound. It just feels like combat maybe could have been tweaked in your favor a little. Yes, that influences the difficulty, but because of the way the combat works, it just makes it seem like it's not very realistic. Historically in Fallujah in 2004, US and UK forces had around a 20-to-1 kill ratio. There was nothing even about the combat whatsoever. I love how fast-paced it plays, including the combat, and it fits the gameplay perfectly, but adjusting the difficulty or reducing the wide range of options a bit, or having you as the player have the ability to reduce that wide range more often would be beneficial to the game. There are also some other aspects that sound fun to have, such as, like I mentioned before, reaction fire, but I'd be careful it doesn't increase the complexity of the rules too much. The rules of Boots on the Ground are simple, and they need to stay that way. I just like to see the player have more agency when it comes to combat and more luck mitigation. Finally, and this is not actually a negative for me, but I do want to mention it, the insurgents, they're controlled by the deck of cards, but you will need to make decisions nearly every turn for them. Best place to be placed, best place to move, who to fire at, etc. I don't have a problem with it. I feel the cards give you guidance and there's certain limitations, place X amount, move X amount, fire at closest, or place near closest, that I'm comfortable playing the insurgents to the best of their ability. The cards, they're just simply not going to tell you, move X counter to Y square. I personally think that would bog down the game way too much, as I've seen in other tactical war games with Solitaire bots, but it is something to be aware of. Okay, that's it for the cons. On to the pros. First off, I love the look of the game. This deluxe edition is a huge improvement over the original printing. The cards are high quality, linen finished. The mounted map board, it's bright, it's easy to read. The counters are all very clear, very attractive. At this point, I do expect high quality components from Worthington, and we got that. We also get a very attractive game overall. The counters look great on the map, and the look of the game when it's set up just pulls me into the theme. Now, I would have complained if maybe the back side of the board was back printed with a different map, maybe something set outside of a Middle Eastern city, or just something with green. But I don't want to sound greedy here. I do love what we got. Second, For such a simple game, I love the replayability. I feel like sometimes with simple games, they can be the type you play half a dozen times and then you put them away on the shelf or trade away or sell off. Not with Boots on the Ground. The game comes with 12 missions, ranging from clearing buildings, rescuing hostages, holding off insurgent assaults, making a run to a safe zone, even finding WMDs. Someone get George Bush on the line. This just feels like the type of game also would be easy for fans to create missions. I haven't played any fan missions, but I did see that there are some posted on the game's Board Game Geek forums. Third, the game plays fast. If you watch my playthrough video, you saw me complete an entire mission in under an hour. For a tactical scale, hex, or in this case square, based war game, that's basically unheard of. Pretty much any hex encounter war game, that's unheard of. There are definitely sacrifices made to depth and realism to gain that fast gameplay, but I find the trade-off more than worth it. Fourth, I really enjoyed the flexibility of the activation system. Having to choose from turn to turn between activating a team of adjacent soldiers for more kind of generic actions, or activating a single soldier for greater and possibly more effective action is so much fun. I love having that choice. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes that choice is hard, other times it's obvious, but I like that, I like that I'm forced into decision making on nearly every allied activation instead of just automatically each turn, activate, move, fire each soldier, right? Following the same rules every turn. The rules on some of the abilities and how they work could be cleaned up or explained a little better, perhaps with a more extensive example of play from the designer than what you're given in the rulebook. It's nice that we have one, but just something maybe a little bit more, expanded, right? Personally, I just make a ruling on how a mechanic works and how it's going to apply in this game, and I move on. Fifth, and finally, because the game rules are simple and gameplay is fast, it has a really strong sort of action movie feel, right? Quick activations for both sides. You spend a little time maneuvering your soldiers, considering tactics, and then you toss some dice. The overall experience, it just hits for me. All right, that's it for my pros and cons. Let's end with my final thoughts. Boots on the Ground has turned out to be one of those games where I don't agree with the majority opinion, and they don't agree with me. Because despite a 6.4 rating on Board Game Geek, and a lot of criticism on there, I was honestly impressed by Boots on the Ground. I have my issues with the game, especially parts of combat and a lack of luck mitigation, and I stand by my criticisms. But at the end of the day, I had a blast with the game. This is not a simulation of small unit tactical combat. This is an arcade game, an action movie, and you need to view it with that in mind, because when viewed through the lens of what the design is supposed to be, you will appreciate it. It's a difficult game, but not impossible. I read a number of opinions that the game is impossible to win, and from my experience, that's simply not true. Some missions are going to be more difficult than others, but that's also a positive in my opinion, not a negative. Watch my recorded playthrough to see a victory, by the way. For the flaws I mentioned earlier, I simply found myself having a lot of fun playing the game. And that's why we are in this hobby, right? It brings history to life, even in a simple format like a board game or a simpler game like this. It just allows us to simulate or relive that history on our tables, right? Bring it out of the movies, bring it out of a book, and put it on the table. My opinion on this game may go against the majority, but I just really enjoyed Boots on the Ground. I'm wondering if many of the negative opinions I read online may be referring to the original edition published in 2010, because I have to say this deluxe edition published in 2024 seems like a much improved game. I'd have no problem recommending the deluxe edition to anyone looking for a solitaire war game with a modern warfare theme set at a tactical scale. The look, the theme, and the gameplay have all combined to win me over. At the end of my reviews, I like to offer a reading recommendation. A book that I've really enjoyed, focusing on modern urban combat, is New Dawn, The Battles for Fallujah by Robert Lowry. The author gives us an overview of the war in Iraq to that point, then talks about the city of Fallujah, the region around it, and some of its culture. He begins by covering the short-lived Operation Vigilant Resolve, and then spends the majority of the book on the later and far more successful Operation Phantom Fury. We get to hear stories from and about the Marines that were there, and stories of the Marines that never came home. As an American, it's a powerful book, and certainly helps put recent history in perspective. Thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please let me know what you think of my video and this game in the comments below. And until next time, everyone, later.